$950. To the people Arthur was hired to drive, it was the price of a mediocre bottle of wine or a fleeting weekend spa treatment. But to Arthur, it was the exact amount needed to buy his 6-year-old daughter Mia the advanced pediatric nebulizer that their insurance coldly deemed non-essential. The fluorescent lights of the auto shop hummed overhead, a buzzing reminder of the hours he had already pulled. Arthur stared at the digital invoice on his cracked phone screen. He wiped a smear of black grease from his forehead with the back of his hand. His knuckles were raw, the skin split from a stubborn bolt on a '98 Camry. In the corner of the garage, a small portable radio played a low jazz tune, nearly drowned out by the hiss of a pneumatic lift. "Arthur, you still here, man?" His boss, Miller, called out from the small, glass-walled office. Arthur didn't look up. He was staring at the price of a breath. $949.99 plus tax. "Just finishing the oil change on the Henderson truck," Arthur replied, his voice raspy from a day of breathing in exhaust and metallic dust. He tightened the oil plug, the wrench clicking with a finality that felt like a heartbeat. He stood up, his back popping in 3 different places. He was 32, but tonight he felt 50. He walked over to the industrial sink, the orange pumice soap smelling like artificial citrus and regret. He scrubbed. He scrubbed until his skin was red, trying to get the charcoal-colored residue out from under his fingernails. Mia was at the neighbor's house. Mrs. Gable was kind, but she didn't know how to calibrate the old, rattling machine they currently used. Every time Mia coughed, Arthur felt a phantom pain in his own chest, a sympathetic constriction of the lungs. He reached into his locker and pulled out a garment bag he'd borrowed from his brother-in-law. Inside was a black suit. It was cheap polyester, shiny in the wrong places, and smelled faintly of mothballs and old weddings. Arthur stripped off his work shirt. His torso was lean, corded with the kind of muscle that comes from manual labor, not a gym. He pulled on the white dress shirt. The collar was a size too small, pinching his throat. He fumbled with the buttons, his thick fingers unaccustomed to such delicate work. He zipped up the trousers. They were a bit short, revealing his black work socks, but in the dark of a car, who would notice? He tied the black silk tie. He'd watched a YouTube tutorial 3 times during his lunch break to get the knot right. He looked at himself in the spotted, cracked mirror above the sink. He looked like a man pretending to be someone else. "You look like $1,000,000, Miller said, leaning against the doorframe, chewing on a toothpick. "I just need 950, Arthur muttered, grabbing his keys. "The VIP gig?" "You sure? Those people, they treat drivers like the upholstery." "I don't care if she treats me like the floor mat," Arthur said, adjusting his jacket. "As long as the check clears." He walked out into the cool evening air. The city was beginning to glow, the skyscrapers in the distance looking like gold bars set against a purple velvet sky. He drove his beat-up sedan to the luxury car depot on the edge of the financial district. The manager, a man named Sterling with a voice like sandpaper, handed him the keys to a black Mercedes Maybach. "The car is worth more than your life, Arthur. Don't scratch it. Don't sniff the leather. Don't speak unless spoken to." Arthur took the keys. The weight of the fob felt heavy, a symbol of a world he didn't belong to. He climbed into the driver's seat. The interior smelled of new leather and expensive silence. He checked the GPS. Destination. The Heights. The richest zip code in the state. He pulled out of the lot, the engine purring with a terrifying smooth power. As he drove, he thought about Mia. He thought about the way she looked when she struggled to breathe, eyes wide, chest heaving, her little hands gripping the bed sheets. He had to do this. He had to be a ghost in a suit for 6 hours. The iron gates of the Vance estate swung open automatically as he approached. The driveway was a long, winding ribbon of crushed white limestone, illuminated by soft, recessed lighting. He pulled up to the front portico. A grand mansion of glass and steel loomed over him, cold and magnificent. He checked his watch. 7 p.m. sharp. He stepped out of the car, standing by the rear door, his hands clasped in front of him. The front door of the mansion opened. A woman stepped out. Eleanor Vance. Arthur had seen her on the cover of business magazines, but the glossy paper didn't do justice to the sheer aura of her. She was draped in emerald silk that seemed to liquidize as she moved. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, perfect bun. She was looking at her tablet, her thumb flying across the screen. She didn't look at the gardens. She didn't look at the sky. She certainly didn't look at him. Arthur opened the door. The movement was fluid, practiced in his head a dozen times. "Good evening, Miss Vance," he said, keeping his voice neutral and professional. She didn't respond. She stepped into the car, the silk rustling like a warning. She sat down and immediately tapped the glass partition. Arthur closed the door softly. He walked around to the driver's side and slipped in. He saw her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her face was a mask of cold calculation. She tapped the glass again, more insistently this time. Arthur realized she wanted the partition up. He pressed the button. The motor whirred and the thick glass rose, sealing him into his own small, silent cockpit. He was alone with the road. She was alone with her empire. He shifted into drive and began the descent from the hills toward the city center. The charity gala was held at the Grand Museum of Art. The streets leading up to it were choked with black SUVs and sports cars. Arthur navigated the traffic with the precision of a surgeon. He'd spent his life fixing machines. He knew exactly how they moved. He glanced at the partition. He could see the faint glow of her tablet reflected on the dark glass. She hadn't moved. She hadn't shifted. She was a statue made of ambition and emerald silk. To her, he was just a component of the vehicle, an organic steering mechanism. He thought about the grease under his nails that he couldn't quite get out. He felt the itch of it. He wondered if she'd ever had to worry about the price of a breath. Probably not. Her world was one of climate-controlled air and filtered water. He reached the red carpet. The flashes of cameras were already popping, a rhythmic, aggressive pulsing of light. He pulled the Maybach to a stop at the exact designated spot. He stepped out, the humid city air hitting his face. He walked to the rear door. He opened it, shielding the interior from the prying eyes of the photographers. Eleanor stepped out. For a split second, she looked up, her eyes meeting his. They were beautiful eyes, but they were hollow. There was a tiredness there that no amount of money could fix. It was a flash of humanity that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "I'll be at the side entrance for the pickup," Arthur said quietly. She gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod and walked toward the wall of cameras. She didn't say thank you. She didn't acknowledge his existence. Arthur watched her go, her emerald dress disappearing into the crowd of tuxedos and diamonds. He closed the car door. He was just a man in a borrowed suit standing in the rain that had just started to fall. He moved the car to the designated waiting area, a long line of black vehicles idling in the shadows. He sat in the driver's seat and turned off the engine. The silence was heavy. He pulled his phone out and looked at the picture of Mia. She was holding a dandelion. Her cheeks puffed out as she prepared to make a wish. "Hang on, baby girl," he whispered to the empty car. "Daddy's getting the machine." He settled in for the long wait. The rain drummed on the roof, a rhythmic $950 lullaby. He watched the elite of the city through the glass walls of the museum, moving like brightly colored fish in a tank. He was the observer, he was the help. He was the man who knew how to fix an engine but couldn't fix his daughter's lungs without a stranger's charity. The clock on the dashboard ticked toward 9 p.m. The gala was in full swing. Arthur leaned his head back against the headrest. He closed his eyes for a moment. He could almost hear Mia's wheeze in the quiet of the car. It haunted him. He gripped the steering wheel, his calloused hands feeling the expensive leather. He just had to wait. He just had to be part of the machinery for a few more hours. The $950 was waiting. The breath was waiting. He wouldn't fail her. He wouldn't let the ice of the woman in the emerald dress freeze his resolve. He was a father. And tonight, that was the only job that mattered. The rain began to turn from a drizzle into a rhythmic drumming against the panoramic sunroof of the Maybach. Arthur sat in the darkness of the driver's row, a line of idling luxury vehicles stretching down the block from the museum. He checked his watch, 9:15 p.m. He had at least 3 hours of solitude ahead of him. He leaned his head back, closing his eyes, trying to ignore the way the borrowed suit jacket pinched his shoulders. In the quiet, his mind drifted back to the small apartment on 4th Street. He could almost hear the mechanical clack hiss of their current. Nebulizer, a second-hand machine that rattled so loudly it scared Mia. He pictured her small face, the way she tried to be brave, her tiny hand gripping his thumb as the mist swirled around her nose. $950. It wasn't just a number. It was a lifeline. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. The encrypted radio on the dashboard, the one provided by the security firm, erupted with a burst of static-heavy chatter. Unit 4, move to the north entrance immediately. We have a breach. Arthur's eyes snapped open. Unit 4 was him. Unit 4, confirm, the voice barked. Arthur grabbed the handset. Unit 4 moving. ETA 60 seconds. He didn't think, he reacted. His years as a mechanic meant he understood the limits of a machine, and he pushed the Maybach into gear, the tires chirping against the wet asphalt as he swung out of the queue. He bypassed a row of startled chauffeurs, his hands moving with fluid, grease-stained precision. As he rounded the corner to the north entrance, the scene was chaos. The elegant, controlled atmosphere of the gala had been punctured. A sea of umbrellas and flashing strobe lights swarmed the limestone steps. He saw her immediately. Eleanor Vance was a flash of emerald silk in a storm of black raincoats. She was surrounded by at least a dozen paparazzi, their cameras thrusting forward like weapons. The flashes were constant, a blinding, strobe light assault that turned the rainy night into a jagged, silver nightmare. Miss Vance! Is it true the SEC is freezing your assets? Eleanor! Did your board of directors ask for your resignation tonight? The questions were shouted like accusations. Usually, Eleanor Vance moved through the world with an invisible shield of power, but tonight, something was wrong. Her security detail, 2 men in suits, were struggling to hold back a crowd that had grown desperate and aggressive. A camera lens swung dangerously close to her temple, nearly clipping her. Arthur didn't wait for the valet. He didn't wait for a signal. He slammed the car into park, ignored the stay in the vehicle protocol, and vaulted out of the driver's seat. The cold rain hit him instantly, soaking the cheap fabric of his suit. He used his height and the broad, heavy shoulders built from years of hoisting engine blocks to carve a path. He didn't push, he simply became an immovable object. "Step back," Arthur commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it had the tonal weight of a man who spent his days around heavy iron and fire. It was a voice that expected to be obeyed. He reached Eleanor just as a photographer tried to grab her arm for a better angle. Arthur's hand shot out, catching the man's wrist with a grip like a vice. He didn't say a word, just stared the man down until the camera lowered. Then he turned to Eleanor. Up close, the Ice Queen was gone. Her skin was the color of parchment. Her eyes were wide, darting, unfocused. She was shaking not from the cold, but from a visceral, mounting terror. She looked less like a CEO and more like a person drowning in a room full of air. "I've got you," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the steady anchor he was for Mia during her midnight attacks. He placed a firm, grounding hand on the small of her back, careful not to wrinkle the silk, yet firm enough to let her know he was there. He used his body as a physical shield, tucking her under his arm as he walked her the last 5 feet to the car. The paparazzi surged one last time, a wall of white light and screaming questions. Arthur didn't flinch. He opened the rear door, guided her inside, and slammed it shut with a heavy thud that silenced the world outside. He jumped back into the driver's seat and floored it. The Maybach surged forward, leaving the shouting mob in the rearview mirror. For 2 miles, there was no sound in the car but the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers. Arthur glanced in the mirror. Eleanor wasn't sitting back. She was hunched over, her hands clawing at the emerald silk over her chest. Her breath was coming in short, jagged gasps, the terrifying sound of someone losing the battle with their own lungs. "Miss Vance?" No answer. Her head was down, her diamonds shimmering mockingly in the dark. Arthur realized she wasn't just upset. She was having a full-scale panic attack. Having spent years watching Mia struggle for oxygen, he recognized the signs instantly. The blue tint on the fingernails, the frantic rising of the shoulders, the hollow look of someone who feels the world closing in. He didn't ask permission. He reached over and pressed the button to lower the glass partition. The barrier slid down and the smell of her expensive perfume, now mixed with the sharp scent of fear, filled the front of the car. "Eleanor, look at me." He used her first name. The breach of protocol was massive, but he didn't care about the $950 anymore. He cared about the person gasping for air 3 feet behind him. She didn't look up. "Eleanor, listen to my voice," he said, pulling the car into a quiet, tree-lined side street and bringing it to a slow crawl. He kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, locking onto her reflection. "You're having a panic attack. It feels like the end of the world, but it's just your body playing a trick on you. You are safe. The car is locked. I am driving. Nobody can get to you." She made a small, pathetic sound, a whimper that broke through her usual facade. "Look at the mirror," Arthur insisted, his voice gentle but commanding. "Find my eyes." Slowly, painfully, she lifted her head. Her mascara had trailed down her cheeks. When her eyes finally met his in the glass, he saw the raw vulnerability of a woman who had spent too long being strong for everyone else. "There you are," Arthur whispered. "Now, do what I do. We're going to breathe together." "Okay?" He took a slow, deep breath, visible in the way his chest expanded against the tight suit. "In for 4, 1.2.4. He watched her try. She hitched, her lungs spasming. "It's okay. Again, in .2.4. Hold it. Keep it there. Now, out for 6, slow, like you're blowing out a candle for a little girl's birthday." He thought of Mia. He used the exact cadence he used at 3 a.m. in a dark bedroom. "Out .2.3.4.5.6. They did it again. And again. The silence of the car became a sanctuary. The streetlights outside blurred into long ribbons of gold as Arthur kept the car moving at a steady, rhythmic pace. He didn't head for her penthouse yet. He knew she wasn't ready to face the lonely silence of a high-rise. Slowly, the tension began to bleed out of her shoulders. Her hands stopped clawing at her dress and came to rest limply in her lap. Her breathing deepened, the jagged edges smoothing out. "Better?" he asked softly. Eleanor leaned her head back against the headrest, closing her eyes. A single, genuine tear tracked through the ruined makeup. "I thought I was going to die," she whispered. Her voice was stripped of its corporate steel. It was just a woman's voice, tired and thin. "You weren't," Arthur said, turning the car toward the coast road, away from the prying eyes of the city. "You just ran out of air for a second. Everyone does eventually." He saw her reach up and touch the diamond collar at her throat. She unclipped it, and the multi-million-dollar necklace falling onto the leather seat like a piece of junk. She didn't seem to care. "How did you know?" she asked, her eyes still closed. "How did you know exactly what to do?" Arthur gripped the steering wheel. He could feel the $950 looming in the back of his mind, but it felt different now. It wasn't just a transaction. "I have a lot of practice," he said, his voice thick with a sudden, unexpected honesty. "My daughter, she has asthma. Bad. I've spent the last 4 years learning how to help someone find their breath when they think they've lost it." In the mirror, he saw Eleanor open her eyes. She looked at the back of his head, really looking at him for the first time, not as a driver, not as an employee, but as a man. The ice hadn't just fractured. It had vanished into the rain. "Tell me about her," Eleanor said. And for the first time in his life, Arthur, the man who fixed things in silence, began to talk. The Maybach glided onto the PCH, the hum of the tires against the wet pavement providing a low-frequency hum that filled the space where Eleanor's panic had been. The city's jagged skyline was shrinking in the side mirrors, replaced by the vast, undulating darkness of the Pacific. "Tell me about her?" Eleanor repeated. Her voice was no longer the sharp, clipped instrument of a woman who commanded boards and broke competitors. It was hushed, muffled by the expensive leather and the weight of her own exhaustion. "Her name is Mia," Arthur said. Just saying the name made the tension in his jaw soften. "She's 6. She has her mother's eyes, big, dark, always looking at you like she's trying to figure out if you're telling the truth. But she's got my stubbornness." God help her. He heard a soft, dry chuckle from the back seat. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh. It wasn't a joyful sound exactly, but it was human. "Stubbornness is a survival trait," Eleanor whispered. "In my world, it's a weapon. In yours, I imagine it's a necessity." "It is when you're fighting for air," Arthur replied. He took a slow turn, the car leaning perfectly. She was diagnosed when she was 2. It started as a cough that wouldn't quit. Then one night she just stopped. I remember carrying her into she was so light, like a bird. I've spent every night since then with one ear open, listening to the rhythm of her lungs through the baby monitor. You get so you can hear a wheeze through two walls and a closed door. Eleanor leaned forward. She didn't press the button to raise the partition. Instead, she rested her chin near the gap, her emerald sleeve brushing against the console. The Ice Queen was gone, replaced by a woman who looked suddenly, jarringly small in the vastness of the limousine. "And the $950? She asked. "The company." "They told me the rate for a private security driver was high tonight. I didn't realize it was a specific target." Arthur felt a flush of heat in his neck. He felt exposed, the reality of his poverty laid bare in the cabin of a car that cost more than his apartment building. "It's for a nebulizer," he said, his voice level. "A Peritrek. It's portable, fast, and it doesn't sound like a freight train, our insurance." They called it luxury equipment. They said the old plug-in model from the 80s was sufficient. But that thing takes 20 minutes to deliver a treatment. 20 minutes is a lifetime when a 6-year-old is turning blue, Ms. Vance, the new one. "It's $950 with the pediatric mask and the battery pack. I had $300 saved. This gig was the rest." He stopped talking, suddenly embarrassed by the weight of his own honesty. He expected a polite, distant, "I see," or perhaps a generic expression of sympathy. That was the transactional nature of the world he knew. Instead, there was a long, heavy silence. "I have $42 billion under management," Eleanor said suddenly. Her voice was flat, devoid of pride. "I have 3 homes on 2 continents. I have a jet that can be fueled and ready in 40 minutes. And tonight, at that gala, I felt like I was suffocating. I was surrounded by 500 people who love me, and not one of them noticed I couldn't breathe. Not one." She paused, her eyes catching his in the mirror again. "You noticed, and you aren't even on my payroll, not really." "I know what it looks like when the air runs out," Arthur said simply. "It doesn't matter if you're wearing emeralds or a Disney pajama top. The fear is the same." Eleanor sank back into the seat, looking out at the black expanse of the ocean. "My father used to say that money is just a way to buy distance. Distance from discomfort, distance from people, distance from the mess of being alive. I've spent 15 years buying as much distance as possible. I thought if I was high enough up in a penthouse, the mess wouldn't be able to reach me." She gestured vaguely toward the window, at the dark waves crashing against the cliffs. But tonight, the mess caught up. The rumors, the board members circling like sharks, the feeling that if I trip once, they'll all just walk over me. I realized I've bought so much distance that there's no one left close enough to catch me. Arthur drove in silence for a while. He thought about his drafty apartment, the smell of grease that never truly left his skin, and the constant, gnawing anxiety of the next bill. Then he thought about the way Mia would throw her arms around his neck when he walked through the door, her hair smelling like strawberry shampoo and stickers. "Maybe you bought the wrong kind of distance," Arthur said softly. Eleanor didn't snap back. She didn't take offense. She just watched him. She noticed the way he handled the car knot with the bored indifference of a professional, but with a quiet, attentive care. She looked at his hands again. They were mechanic's hands, thick, scarred, the skin permanently stained in the creases by oil and time. They were hands that built, fixed, and held. "Tell me about the grease," she said. Arthur looked down at his knuckles. "I work at Miller's Auto, mostly Japanese imports. It's honest work, but it doesn't pay for $900 breathing machines. I took the suit from my brother-in-law. It's tight in the shoulders because he's a CPA and I spend my days pulling transmissions." "I like it," she whispered. "The grease. It means you actually do something. Everything in my life is ... abstract. It's numbers on a screen. It's projections and synergy. If I disappeared tomorrow, 1,000 algorithms would just close the gap. But if you disappeared, the cars wouldn't run, and Mia ... Her voice trailed off. She reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone. For a moment, Arthur thought she was going back to work, back to the glow of the tablet. But she didn't turn it on. She just held it. "Can I see her?" she asked. Arthur hesitated, then reached for his phone on the dash. He tapped the screen and handed it back through the partition. It was a photo from 2 days ago. Mia was sitting on the floor of the garage, wearing oversized safety goggles and holding a plastic wrench, fixing her tricycle. She was laughing, her face lit up with a pure, unadulterated joy that seemed to defy the very concept of a venture capital firm. Eleanor stared at the photo for a long time. The light from the screen reflected in her eyes, making the tears she was holding back shimmer. "She's beautiful, Arthur." "She's my whole world," he replied. "I can see that. It's in the way you drive. It's in the way you spoke to me. You weren't worried about the CEO. You were worried about the person." She handed the phone back. As her fingers brushed his, Arthur felt a strange spark, not the cinematic jolt of a romance novel, but a deep, grounded sense of connection. Two people, worlds apart, meeting in the dark on a road to nowhere, bound by the simple, terrifying reality of needing to breathe. The car reached a turnout overlooking the sea. Arthur slowed to a stop. He didn't turn off the engine. He just let the Maybach idle, a warm cocoon against the cold coastal rain. "I don't want to go home yet," Eleanor said. "If I go home, the distance comes back. The silence. Stay here for a minute. Just Tell me more. Tell me about the shop. Tell me about the most difficult engine you ever fixed." Arthur smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached his tired eyes. He started talking. He told her about the '67 Mustang that had been sitting in a barn for 20 years, and how he'd spent 3 months coaxing the V8 back to life. He told her about the sound an engine makes when it's perfectly timed a sewing machine. Purr that meant everything was in its right place. As he spoke, he realized she wasn't just listening to the stories. She was listening to him. She was soaking in the sound of a man who knew who he was, a man who didn't need a title or a board seat to feel substantial. The emerald silk of her dress seemed less like armor now and more like a costume she was ready to take off. "Arthur?" she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Yes, Miss Vance?" "Thank you for the air." He looked in the rearview mirror. The Ice Queen was smiling back, a fragile, tentative expression that looked like the first light of dawn. "Anytime," he said. He put the car back into gear. He had a job to do. He had to get her home, collect his payment, and buy a machine. But as he turned the car back toward the city, he knew that the $950 was no longer the most important thing he was taking away from this night. He had seen behind the curtain of a goddess, and she had seen the soul of a mechanic. The silence that followed wasn't heavy or cold anymore. It was shared. The transition from the plush, silent world of a Maybach back to the cacophony of Miller S. Auto Shop was like a sudden plunge into ice water. The morning after the gala, Arthur stood at the counter of the medical supply warehouse, his hands trembling slightly as he counted out the $950. He watched the clerk box up the Perry Trek S, taping the edges with a finality that felt like a victory. When he got home, the apartment was quiet. Mia was still asleep, her breathing heavy and rhythmic. The old machine on her knitstand smelling of ozone and overworked plastic. Arthur replaced it with a new device. He set it up, checked the filters, and sat on the edge of her bed. When she woke up and saw the sleek, quiet machine, her eyes went wide. She didn't have to say anything. She just leaned into his chest, her small lungs expanding without the usual hitch, and Arthur felt a weight lift off his soul that he hadn't realized he was carrying. The job was done. The debt to the world was paid. 2 weeks passed. Arthur returned to his routine, the memory of the woman in the emerald silk fading like a vivid dream. He was back to being the man in the grease-stained coveralls, his life measured in torque specs and oil weights. He assumed Eleanor Vance had returned to her glass tower, her moment of vulnerability tucked away like a shameful secret. People like her didn't look back. They only looked at the next quarter. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day where the heat in the shop felt like a physical burden. Arthur was shoulder-deep in the engine bay of a Ford F-150, trying to reach a stubborn manifold bolt. The shop was a symphony of impact wrenches, the heavy thud of tires being dropped on the floor, and Miller yelling over the radio. Then the music stopped. It wasn't a sudden silence, but a slow, cascading quiet that started at the front bay doors and moved inward. Arthur pulled himself out from under the hood, wiping his forehead with a rag that was more oil than cotton. He squinted against the bright afternoon sun streaming through the open bay. A sleek Blacktown car, not the Maybach, but something equally understated and expensive, was parked in the middle of the oily, gravel-strewn lot. It looked like a diamond dropped in a coal mine. The driver's side door stayed shut. The rear door opened. Eleanor Vance stepped out. She wasn't wearing the emerald silk. She was wearing a simple, high-quality knit sweater in a soft cream color and a pair of dark jeans that looked like they actually belonged on a human being. Her hair wasn't pulled back into that severe boardroom bun. It was loose, falling over her shoulders in soft waves. She looked younger. She looked like she had slept for the first time in years. Arthur stood there, frozen. He felt a sudden, sharp pang of self-consciousness. He was covered in the mess she had spent her life buying distance from. There was a streak of carbon on his cheek, and his hands were black to the wrists. "Arthur," she said, her voice carrying easily through the quiet shop. She didn't sound like a CEO. She sounded like a woman who had walked a long way to find a friend. "Miss Vance," Arthur managed to say, his voice cracking slightly. He dropped the rag and stepped toward her, stopping a respectful 6 feet away. "What are you? Is there something wrong with the car? Did Sterling send you?" She shook her head, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips. No car trouble. And Sterling has no idea I'm here. I'm actually quite good at disappearing when I want to be." She looked around the shop, her eyes taking in the rusted frames, the stacks of old tires, and the smell of ancient chemicals. She didn't look disgusted. She looked curious. "I spent 10 days in a retreat after that night," she said, stepping closer, her expensive shoes clicking on the concrete. "No phones, no tablets, no boards, just air. I did a lot of thinking about that drive, about what you said." She was carrying a small, beautifully wrapped package, tied with a simple twine ribbon. She held it out to him. "I read up on pediatric asthma," she said, her voice dropping lower so the other mechanics wouldn't hear. "I know you got the machine. I made sure the payment went through immediately, but I found this. It's a Sansevieria-specific hybrid. They call it a snake plant, but this one is bred for high oxygen output at night. I thought, for Mia's room, to go with the new machine." Arthur looked at the gift, then at his hands. "I can't. I'll ruin the paper, Eleanor." "It's just paper, Arthur," she said. She didn't wait. She stepped into his personal space, ignoring the grime on his coveralls, and tucked the package into the crook of his arm. The contact was brief, but it felt like the glass partition sliding down all over again. "You saved me that night," she whispered. "And I don't just mean from the photographers. You reminded me that there are things worth protecting that don't have a ticker symbol. You reminded me how to breathe." Arthur found his voice. "I was just doing my job. You're the one who listened." "Most people don't give me anything to listen to," she replied. She looked at the F-150 behind him. "Is that the most difficult engine you've ever fixed?" Arthur laughed, a short, breathless sound. "Not even close. This one's just stubborn." "Well," Eleanor said, smoothing the front of her sweater. She looked nervous. It was a jarring sight, the most powerful woman in venture capital, fidgeting in a garage in the middle of the afternoon. "I realize I never actually got to finish our conversation. We were interrupted by my penthouse and my life." She took a breath, her chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm he had taught her. "I'm going to a small Italian place about 3 blocks from here. It's quiet, no paparazzi, no business talk." "I was wondering, if you're finished with that stubborn Ford, if you'd let me take you to lunch. Just the two of us. No driver, no partition." Arthur looked at Miller, who was staring from the office with his jaw practically hitting the desk. He looked at his hands, the permanent stain of a life of labor. Then he looked at Eleanor. She wasn't looking at the mechanic. She was looking at the man who had held the line in the rain. "I need 10 minutes to wash up," Arthur said. "Take 20, Eleanor smiled. "I'll be waiting in the car." "And Arthur?" "Yeah, don't worry about the suit." "I like the grease." Arthur walked back to the industrial sink. He used the orange pumice soap, scrubbing with a vigor he'd never used before. He didn't care about getting every bit of black out from under his nails. He knew now that she didn't mind the mess. He changed into his spare shirt, checked his reflection in the cracked mirror, and saw a man who was no longer just a ghost in a borrowed suit. He walked out of the shop, leaving the noise and the heat behind. He climbed into the passenger seat of the black car. As they pulled out of the gravel lot, Arthur's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from the neighbor, Mrs. Gable, with a video attached. He opened it and held it so Eleanor could see. In the video, Mia was running through a sprinkler in the small patch of grass behind their building. She was laughing, her chest moving easily, her breath coming in deep, joyful gulps of afternoon air. She wasn't wheezing, she wasn't tired. She was just a little girl, alive and free. Eleanor reached over and placed her hand over Arthur's on the center console. Her skin was cool, his was warm, and for the first time in both of their lives, the distance was gone. "She has a beautiful wish," Eleanor said softly, watching the video. "We both do," Arthur replied. The $950 job had been meant to save a life. He never realized it would be his own that got a second chance. As the car merged into the city traffic, the mechanic and the billionaire drove toward a sun that was no longer just a gold bar in the sky, but a warmth they both could finally feel.